What's the one thing you'd say to your younger self before your first betrayal?
I got promoted to vice president last month. The first woman in the company to ever hold that title in our 130-year-old history. A company built on handshakes, silent nods, and golf course deals where the only women they remembered were the ones handing out cocktails. I didn't get it handed to me. I clawed my way to it, inch by inch, deal by deal, weekend after weekend of skipped birthdays and canceled dinners, every little victory stitched together in silence, because I didn't have anyone to cheer me on, and that was fine. At least I thought it was. Until that night. I invited my family. Nothing dramatic, just the people who've known me since I was in pigtails, who watched me pull all-nighters at the kitchen table and never asked why I always seemed to be overachieving. Never wondering what it was like to live in a house where someone else's C-science project got framed and hung in the hallway, while my college acceptance letter landed in the junk drawer between expired coupons and pizza menus. I kept it simple, sent a formal digital invite, added a personal note to each. It would mean a lot. Because it would have. Because I'd waited my whole damn life for someone in that family to look at me the way they looked at Emily every time she lit a candle and called it a business. The night of the ceremony, I was alone in the hotel suite, standing in front of a full-length mirror, fixing a necklace that used to be my grandmother's, one of the few things I got when she passed. She always said I was the serious one, the one who didn't need applause to know you were doing the right thing, and I guess I believed her. But even the serious ones, the ones who keep their heads down and their mouths shut, want someone in the crowd to stand up and say, "That's my girl." I kept checking my phone, watching the time slide closer to the start of the event, still hoping maybe they were running late, maybe traffic, maybe anything other than what I already knew in my gut. At 6:13 p.m., I got the message. It was from Mom. "So sorry, sweetie," it said. "Emily made dinner plans and we couldn't cancel. We'll make it up to you this weekend. We are so proud!" 2 exclamation points. That's all I got. Not even a call. Not even a voicemail with her voice in it. Just a text with a smiley face at the end, like I'd mentioned a dentist appointment or a new houseplant. The kind of response you send to someone who just told you they cleaned their garage. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed in that overpriced hotel room, blinking at the screen like it might change if I stared long enough. But it didn't. It stayed there, glowing stupidly, while the seconds ticked on, and the room felt smaller, tighter, like all the air had been vacuumed out and my pride was the only thing I could still hold on to. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood up, fixed the clasp on my necklace, smoothed out the dress I'd been saving for a big moment, and walked out like it didn't sting. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. Smile, nod, and keep going. Nobody notices the girl who never needs anything until she stops pretending she doesn't. The ceremony was beautiful in the way those things always are. Too many speeches, cheap champagne, the smell of someone's aftershave clinging to the air. My name was called last. Vice President. First female in the role. Applause thundered from a room full of colleagues, peers, people who barely knew the hours I poured into this job, but clapped anyway, because that's what you do when someone wins something hard-earned. But when I looked out at the tables, there was no familiar face, no mother's tearful smile or father's proud nod, no sister waving with her phone up like she always did at her own events. Just empty chairs I'd reserved, sitting under a reserved sign like a joke. 3 little name cards that might as well have read "not important enough." After the formalities, Mark, my mentor, boss, and the closest thing I've had to a big brother in the corporate world, leaned in and asked, quietly, "Want to say a few words?" He knew. Of course he knew. He saw the look on my face when I walked in, the one I was trying to hide behind lipstick and stiff shoulders. I nodded once, just enough for him to gesture to the mic. I walked up to the podium. My heels echoed on the wood floor. I cleared my throat once, then leaned in. No cue cards, no script, just my voice. Steady, even. I want to thank everyone here tonight, not just for the applause, but for the years it took to get here. It's not lost on me that in a room full of history, being the first anything is a kind of burden. But I carry it with pride. And to those who have supported me, truly supported me, thank you. I paused, looked out at the room. My eyes landed on a table near the back. Emily's friend from high school sat there. She had come. But my own blood hadn't. Then I said it. And to those who never clapped for me, you don't get to start now. The words floated in the air for a second, longer than they needed to, long enough to reach every corner of that room and leave a trace. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. But I said it with the kind of finality that doesn't need volume. And somewhere, at some table I didn't see, a glass stopped clinking and someone shifted in their seat. I felt it. I stepped down from the podium, handed the mic back to Mark, and took a sip of champagne that suddenly didn't taste like victory. It tasted like release. Like burning the last photo of someone who never really looked at you. I glanced at my phone once more. Still nothing. No missed calls. No texts. The night ended. The claps faded. But I didn't go back to the hotel. I walked the streets for an hour in heels that punished every step, letting the silence settle in my bones. Because if this was how it felt to win, maybe I'd been chasing the wrong finish line. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because the next morning, I found out something that changed everything, something that turned quiet hurt into cold calculation. Something that made me wish I'd said more into that microphone. And now I'm going to tell you what that something was. But first, let me ask you, if your whole family missed your biggest moment for a dinner, and it turned out that dinner wasn't what they claimed, would you forgive them? Or would you burn the bridge and let them watch from the other side? The weekend after the ceremony passed in a blur of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink it, unread congratulatory emails from colleagues I barely knew, and the kind of silence from family that doesn't feel like absence, but like a deliberate decision not to speak, the kind of silence you feel in your chest, like gravity pulling you inward. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for my mom's voice to spill out of the speaker in that overly cheerful way she used whenever she knew she'd messed up and wanted to pretend nothing had happened, for my dad to call and say he'd watched the speech online and that he was proud. Maybe not of the words I chose, but at least of the work it took to earn that stage. But nothing came. Not a single message. Not even a forwarded Facebook post. It was like my moment had passed and the family had already moved on, not because they were unaware of its weight, but because they never considered it important enough to begin with. And I wish I could say this came as a surprise, that I was shocked by their indifference or caught off guard by the way my sister somehow turned her dinner into a greater priority than the most significant moment of my professional life. But the truth is, I've seen this pattern my entire life, a slow, aching repetition of being overshadowed, not by failure or weakness, but by the sheer gravity of someone else's ability to pull all attention toward themselves like a black hole dressed in charm. And chaos. Emily has always been the center of the family solar system, the sun around which everything else orbits, no matter how dim her accomplishments might be compared to others, no matter how shallow or inconsistent her efforts. And somewhere along the way, I became the reliable one, the one who didn't need the spotlight, who just got things done, who could be left uncelebrated because, well, Rachel's fine, she always is. Growing up, it started small. When Emily won third place in a regional dance competition, my parents threw a backyard party, complete with cupcakes and balloons, and invited every neighbor within walking distance. When I graduated valedictorian, we went out for pizza, just the four of us, and Mom forgot to bring her camera. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. I had the scholarship, the transcript, the future. Emily had glitter in her hair and cheap metals that turned her skin green. But no matter how much I accomplished, it always felt like she was the one who got the applause, while I was expected to quietly keep building something solid, something respectable, something they could point to in casual conversation, but never actually attend or acknowledge with any kind of real presence. Even as adults, the pattern held. When Emily decided to start a small business, which turned out to be her selling handmade bath bombs out of her apartment for 3 months before she got bored and moved on, my parents sent out a group email asking friends to support her entrepreneurial dreams. They asked me to like and share her posts, even though I was managing multi-million-dollar contracts and trying to negotiate with a boardroom full of men who didn't think I deserved a seat at the table. But that didn't matter. Emily was trying something, and in our house, Effort from her counted more than achievement from me. It was maddening in a quiet, persistent way, like a leaky faucet in the middle of the night that never quite lets you sleep. So when I found myself sitting at my kitchen table that Saturday morning, still in the silk robe I'd worn the night before the ceremony, staring at a photo of Emily's smug little smile from what I assumed was her dinner plan, the bitterness that rose in me wasn't fresh, it was old and familiar, like dust kicked up from the back of a forgotten shelf. She had posted it late Friday night, tagged at some trendy fusion restaurant downtown, smiling across a candlelit table with Mom and Dad on either side of her, all three of them looking relaxed and happy, like nothing of importance had been missed that evening. Her caption read, "Just a quiet night with the two people who always have my back. Love you both forever." I stared at those words, letting them settle over me like a thick fog. The two people who always have my back. That was what she wrote. Not even a hint of guilt, not even a sideways reference to what they had skipped. It was like my ceremony hadn't even existed in her world, like her Instagram post was her way of erasing the evening entirely, of rewriting the timeline so she remained the golden girl, bathed in approval and attention, while I remained invisible, successful but unseen. I could have ignored it. I could have chalked it up to bad timing, to the ongoing Emily-centric family narrative that I'd tolerated for years. But something shifted in me that morning. Maybe it was the way she smiled in that photo, smug and sure, or the way my mother leaned into her like they were sharing some sacred secret that no one else was invited into. Maybe it was the way the caption felt like a direct dig even if it wasn't meant that way, or maybe I was just done pretending I didn't care. So I texted Mom. Nothing confrontational. Just one sentence. "Did you really skip my promotion ceremony for dinner?" Simple. Direct. I wanted to see what she'd say, whether she'd deflect, apologize, justify. I waited 10 minutes. Then 15. Finally, the bubble appeared. Her response was so bland it almost made me laugh. "We couldn't cancel on Emily. She was really excited to share something. We figured we'd celebrate with you this weekend." That was it. No apology. No remorse. Not even a question about how the event had gone or whether I was okay. Just a cold declaration of priorities, wrapped in an exclamation point like that somehow softened the blow. Emily had something to share. That was more important. Not my speech. Not my historic promotion. Not the one night I asked for their presence. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't come out like an accusation or a plea, and I was tired of both. Tired of making space for people who never made space for me. Tired of pretending the crumbs they offered were enough to keep me fed. But more than anything, I was tired of letting Emily walk through life without consequence, always shielded by our parents, always given the benefit of the doubt, always allowed to take up space at the expense of everyone else. I sat with that anger for the rest of the day. I let it simmer and curl around my thoughts like smoke. I knew I wasn't going to confront her yet, not directly. But something in me had shifted. A slow burn that had gone ignored for too long was finally starting to crackle, and I knew that if I didn't do something about it soon, I'd either explode or shut down entirely. Neither option appealed to me. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have predicted, was that this quiet family betrayal wasn't just about forgotten priorities or skipped celebrations. There was something else lurking behind that dinner, something they weren't telling me. And when I finally learned the truth, it would turn everything upside down. Because that dinner wasn't just dinner. And Emily wasn't just celebrating. It wasn't until late Sunday evening, 2 days after the ceremony, long after I had stopped expecting any further calls or explanations from my parents, that I let myself spiral a little deeper than I intended. Not in the melodramatic way of crying into a glass of wine or dramatically deleting phone numbers from my contact list, but in the quieter, far more dangerous way of clicking into social media out of sheer curiosity. Opening up that slippery portal that often reveals more than it should. When you're already on edge, and typing my sister's name into the search bar with a kind of resigned bitterness, unsure of what I was looking for but fully prepared to feel worse once I found it. The photo she had posted from the dinner was still at the top of her page, polished and filtered in the way Emily always presented her life online, carefully curated to suggest joy and intimacy, captioned with another overly sentimental message about how lucky she was and how nothing meant more than family. It was the kind of hollow performance I'd seen her put on countless times, moments shared not for the sake of memory, but for applause, for validation, for the illusion of closeness. I studied the picture again, not just her expression this time, but the whole frame, the table setting, the wine glasses, the flicker of candles caught mid-flick, the faint blur of other guests at nearby tables, and that's when I saw him. At first, he was just a shape. A man sitting a few tables behind them, half turned to the side, his face angled just enough that I could see the sharp jawline and the familiar tilt of his head as he laughed, mouth open, hand resting on the back of the chair beside him. Something about that posture struck a nerve. I squinted, leaned in, zoomed the photo with 2 fingers, heart suddenly doing that subtle lurch it does when memory hits like a flash of heat. I knew that man. I knew the way he smiled, too wide, like he always wanted you to believe he was more confident than he actually was. I knew the expensive watch on his wrist, the way he dressed like he was constantly auditioning for a better life than the one he actually had. His name was Jacob. And 3 years ago, I fired him. The memory came back in pieces, the way things do when you've tucked them away intentionally. He'd been one of our mid-level analysts, brought in through a referral from someone higher up, charming in the interview, capable enough on paper, but deeply inconsistent, the kind of guy who looked busy without actually getting anything done, always looping you in and circling back without ever delivering anything concrete. At first, I tried to mentor him, or at least steer him in the right direction. Because I had learned early in my career that being a woman in leadership meant constantly being expected to fix the inefficiencies of others without ever being given the credit for the outcome. But then the inconsistencies became more serious. Sloppy numbers. Missed calls. A few discrepancies we couldn't ignore. And finally, a full-blown falsification of account details that almost cost us a major client. He had tried to pin it on one of our interns, a terrified, 22-year-old recent grad who nearly quit the industry over the mess. But I wasn't having it. I called him into my office, laid out every error, every lie, every trail of digital breadcrumbs he thought he had wiped clean, and I fired him on the spot. There was no scene, no shouting, just stunned silence from him and the kind of cold professionalism I had trained myself to maintain in moments like that. He didn't fight it. He signed the papers, stood up, and walked out with the kind of brittle arrogance that always cracks under pressure. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. And now here he was, in the background of my sister's celebratory dinner, laughing like a man without consequence, like someone who'd never once tried to destroy someone else's career to cover his own incompetence. The next photo on Emily's page made everything worse. It was a close-up, just the 2 of them, her and Jacob, smiling with their foreheads nearly touching. Her hand resting lightly on his chest in that faux-candid way couples do when they want the world to know they're in love, but also want to seem effortlessly unaware of the camera. The caption was short, "My person." I stared at the screen, blinking. It took me a solid minute to accept what I was seeing, not just because it was Jacob, not just because she was dating the very man I had exposed for fraud and fired in disgrace, but because it meant that my family had been sitting across from him at dinner, smiling, toasting, laughing, entirely unbothered, entirely unaware or worse, uncaring of who he really was. I couldn't decide which possibility was more infuriating. I scrolled back, trying to find the first time he'd appeared on her page. There were no tags, typical of Emily when she wanted to keep things semi-private, but I found a few posts from earlier in the year, photos where he was partially cropped or his face turned away. Little clues I'd missed because I hadn't been paying attention to her curated mess. It looked like they'd been dating for months, possibly longer. And that's when the next question hit me like a hammer. Did they know? Did my mother and father know who he was? Did they know what he'd done? Did Emily? Or had they all just sat there, giggling over pasta and sipping wine with a man who once tried to ruin a young woman's future because he couldn't take responsibility for his own mistakes? I wanted to believe it was ignorance. I wanted to believe Emily had no idea who he really was, that she'd met him under entirely separate circumstances, and that this was just one more absurd cosmic joke meant to remind me that no matter how far I climbed, the people in my life would always find a way to trivialize the weight of my efforts. But something didn't sit right. Because Emily had always known where I worked. She'd always known I managed a major team at our firm. And Jacob knew my last name. He had sat in my office. He had seen the nameplate on the desk. There was no way he didn't connect the dots, no way he didn't realize who she was, who I was. Which meant either he had lied to her about it, or worse, they had talked about me and decided it didn't matter. That possibility was like swallowing glass. That she would knowingly be with someone who had tried to destroy not just a project or a team, but a young woman's trust in herself. That she would bring him to a dinner in place of supporting her own sister's career-defining night. That they would all sit there, as if nothing had happened, while I stood on a stage in a crowded room full of strangers, giving a speech to no one that should have meant everything. I closed the app and sat back in my chair, hands trembling slightly, a cold, bitter clarity settling over me. This wasn't about a missed dinner anymore. This wasn't about favoritism or forgetfulness or emotional neglect. This was about something far deeper, something far uglier, a betrayal not of presence, but of character. And I knew in that moment that I wouldn't let it go. I wouldn't let it slide this time. Because what they had done, knowingly or not, crossed a line I could never uncross. And I was already planning how I would make them see it. It's a strange thing, the kind of energy you feel in your body when betrayal isn't just an abstract wound or a forgotten birthday or a quiet seat left empty at a celebration, but instead takes shape in something real. Something with a name and a face and a past you once tried to clean up before it exploded, and now that same name, that same face, is sitting at the head of a table surrounded by people who once claimed to love you more than anything, drinking wine with your mother, laughing too easily with your father, wrapping his arm around your sister like he's been here forever, like he belongs. That kind of betrayal doesn't sting. It burns. It calcifies in your spine and settles in the pit of your stomach like cement. It gives you clarity, not the healthy kind, not the sort that brings healing, but the kind that sharpens into resolve, cold and surgical, and makes you understand that if people have chosen to look past the truth for the sake of comfort or convenience, then you have every right to choose honesty, even if it tastes bitter when you finally speak it out loud. When the engagement invitation came, I wasn't surprised, although I did laugh, not because it was funny, but because the timing was so absurdly perfect it almost felt scripted. Like Emily had waited exactly 1 week after skipping my promotion ceremony to announce her engagement to the very man I had once fired for professional misconduct, a man who, as far as I could tell, had never faced a single consequence outside the closed doors of my office. The email came on a Tuesday morning, sent from Emily's personal account, complete with pastel pink borders, an attached image of her and Jacob beaming with forced joy in front of some generic vineyard, and a message that read, "We'd be honored to celebrate our love with the people who matter most." It was addressed to the whole family, with my name listed in the to field like it hadn't been an afterthought. I stared at it for nearly 5 minutes before clicking away, not deleting it, not even marking it as unread, just letting it sit there like an unanswered dare. For the rest of the week, I didn't reply. I didn't reach out. I didn't ask questions or pretend to be happy for her. I didn't offer to help with planning or dress shopping or floral arrangements or any of the other meaningless gestures I'd been conditioned into performing during every one of Emily's manufactured milestones. I said nothing. I waited. And in that silence, I could feel something powerful building, not just within me, but around me, a shift in posture, a quiet reclaiming of control. Because for the first time in years, I realized I didn't want to be included in their celebrations. I didn't want a seat at their table. What I wanted was truth. Not whispered or carefully wrapped in diplomacy. I wanted it out in the open, raw, uncomfortable, and undeniable. The dinner was held the following Saturday at a chic Italian place in the city, the kind of place with dim lighting and overpriced appetizers and waiters who whispered like every customer was royalty. The kind of place where Emily had always dreamed of being the center of attention, where every candlelit surface was a stage and every mirror was a reminder of how adored she was. I arrived 5 minutes late, deliberately dressed in a simple black jumpsuit, hair pulled back, no jewelry except for the same thin necklace I'd worn at the promotion ceremony, the one no one had complimented because no one had shown up to see it. The moment I walked through the door, I could feel the temperature in the room shift, just slightly. Not enough for anyone to name it aloud, but enough that the air felt thicker, more aware of itself. My mother spotted me first, her eyes widening just a bit. Not in surprise that I had come, she knew I would. She knew I wasn't the type to let things go quietly, but in anticipation. As if she could already sense what might be coming and was hoping I would keep the peace. Emily was seated at the head of the long table near the back, smiling at something Jacob had just whispered in her ear, and when she saw me, she didn't stand, didn't wave, just raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement, a hollow little nod that said, "There you are. You came after all." Jacob turned toward me with a smile I'd seen once before, that same polished grin he'd worn during his exit interview, when he'd tried to convince me it was all a misunderstanding. The dinner began as expected, with clinking glasses and clumsy toasts from distant relatives, half-sincere jokes about commitment and wedding stress, light laughter, the low murmur of conversation over bread baskets and rows. I sat near the middle of the table, just close enough to observe, just far enough not to be asked to speak, not yet. I watched them all carefully, studying their body language, the way my father leaned into Jacob's stories like he was already a son-in-law, the way Emily played with the edge of her napkin when people weren't looking, her smile flickering ever so slightly when the attention drifted elsewhere. It was all so familiar, so painfully predictable, the curated chaos, the performance of closeness, the underlying current of insecurity masked by sparkle and wine. Eventually, someone tapped a fork against their glass, I don't even remember who, and asked if the bride-to-be's sister might want to say a few words. A few polite claps followed. A spotlight handed down like a bone thrown to a quiet dog. I didn't hesitate. I stood slowly, letting my chair scrape softly against the hardwood, and picked up my wine glass, though I didn't take a sip. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't smile. I just began. "I'll keep this short," I said, my voice low but clear enough to cut through the small talk still buzzing at the table ends. "Emily, Jacob, congratulations. Truly. It's a beautiful thing, love, when it finds two people who can look past each other's flaws." A few awkward chuckles. My mother froze. Jacob stiffened slightly. I continued. "Some of you may know that Jacob and I have crossed paths before. What you may not know is that, 3 years ago, I fired him." The room went still in the way that only happens when something real has finally cut through the performance. I could feel my sister's breath catch, though she didn't speak. I didn't look at her. I looked at my father. Then at Jacob. "He was working under my division," I said calmly, "and we discovered several discrepancies in his financial reports, numbers that didn't add up, records that had been tampered with." When confronted, he attempted to deflect the blame onto a junior team member, someone far younger, far less powerful. Someone who could have had their entire career ruined if we hadn't investigated properly. And we did investigate. And then I made the call to let him go. Jacob opened his mouth as if to protest, but I held up a finger, quieting him with nothing more than a glance. "I don't bring this up to ruin your evening," I said, though my voice betrayed the fact that I didn't mind if it did. "I bring it up because when people choose to celebrate love, especially within families, they ought to do so with their eyes open, not just to the romance, but to the reality. And the reality is that this man, the man you've all welcomed so warmly, once chose dishonesty over accountability. And my sister, knowingly or not, chose him anyway." A silence followed that no one dared to break. I set my glass down without finishing the toast, turned slowly, and walked away from the table. No one called my name. No one chased after me. And if anyone clapped, I didn't hear it. Outside, the city buzzed with life, taxis honking, lights flickering, strangers shouting across sidewalks, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace, not because I had burned the bridge, but because I had finally stopped pretending I wanted to cross it. And still, a question lingered, unspoken but sharp. If the truth doesn't change the way people see you, if it doesn't crack their carefully built illusions, then what does? Maybe the answer wasn't in exposing others. Maybe it was in finally refusing to hide yourself. In the days that followed the engagement dinner, a strange sort of silence settled over everything, not the kind of silence that comes from peace or closure or the calming stillness after a storm has passed, but rather the hollow, weighty kind that clings to the corners of every room, follows you like a shadow, and reminds you that once something fundamental has cracked, it doesn't just return to its original form. It changes the shape of everything that grows around it. The quiet wasn't just in the form of unanswered messages or the abrupt halt of family group chats that used to buzz with meaningless updates about the weather or Sunday potlucks. It was in the way people paused before saying my name, as if it had become attached to something too sharp to hold. It was in the way my mother's friends stopped liking my social media posts. It was in the way even my father, who had always been the quieter one, didn't call to ask me how work was or how I was holding up, as if the act of speaking to me now would force him to confront the parts of himself he had ignored for decades. What struck me the most wasn't that I had been left out, because that was nothing new. What struck me was how quickly the story had been rewritten, how fast people rushed to edit the narrative to suit their own comfort. In one version, I had ruined a joyful evening out of spite, had embarrassed my sister in front of friends and family, had exposed something irrelevant from the past that should have stayed buried. In another, I had overstepped, turned a personal grudge into public humiliation, had used an intimate family event to stage a corporate vendetta. No one, at least no one from their side, spoke of what Jacob had actually done. No one questioned the morality of building a life with someone who had once falsified financial records and manipulated a powerless intern to cover his tracks. No one seemed particularly interested in whether or not my sister had known, or whether or not she cared once she found out. The facts didn't matter. The discomfort did. And, because I had been the source of that discomfort, I had become the problem. It's a dangerous thing, I've learned, to challenge a family system that relies on selective memory and polite omission to keep itself intact. People will go to remarkable lengths to protect the myth of harmony, to uphold the illusion of unity, even if that means throwing one of their own under the bus. Especially if that one has always been the one who didn't ask for much. I had made it easy over the years, by staying silent, by being dependable, by swallowing disappointment without choking on it, by not asking to be the center of attention, by making it okay for them to forget me because I never made a scene. But the moment I stopped being easy, the moment I stood up and told the truth without dressing it in family-friendly packaging, I became a threat to the version of the story they liked best. And still, I don't regret it. I don't regret standing in that restaurant and speaking plainly. I don't regret refusing to pretend that the man they were about to toast into our family was harmless or trustworthy or deserving of the benefit of the doubt. I don't even regret the way I said it, without apology, without softening the blow, because some truths do not deserve to be wrapped in niceties. Some truths, when told gently, only get ignored. What I do feel, though, is a kind of tiredness that runs deeper than physical exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones when you finally realize that no amount of achievement, no matter how historic or hard-earned, will ever be enough for people who never really saw you to begin with. I think, somewhere deep down, I had hoped that the promotion, the speech, the moment I stood on that stage and claimed something remarkable, would finally force them to look at me differently. To see the years of effort and sacrifice not as background noise, but as a life fully lived, a success hard-fought. But they didn't. Or maybe they did, and it just made them uncomfortable to realize that I had done it all without them. A week after the dinner, I received a voicemail from my father. The sound of his voice, when I first heard it, startled me not because it was loud or emotional, but because it was quieter than I remembered, almost unsure of itself, like he was speaking in a language he didn't fully understand. "Hey, kiddo," he said, and paused for longer than necessary, the kind of pause that signals hesitation rather than thought. I've been thinking about everything, about the dinner, about your speech, and, well, I didn't clap for you. I should have. I didn't come to the ceremony, and I should have. I guess I thought you'd understand. You always did. But I think maybe I took for granted that you'd always be there, that you didn't need anything from us because you were so good at doing it all on your own. Another pause. This one longer. I'm sorry. I wish I was better. I really do. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it. Not because I planned to respond, but because something about hearing the apology, soft, imperfect, far too late, felt like the final piece of the puzzle I hadn't known was missing. It didn't make anything whole. It didn't undo years of imbalance or favoritism or neglect. But it was something. And something, no matter how small, is sometimes all you need to stop the bleeding. A few days later, I saw a new post on Emily's page. A photo of her and Jacob standing in front of a small house with a red door, keys in hand, the caption reading, "New Beginnings." The comment section was full of heart emojis and well wishes and "so happy for you" from people who had no idea who he really was. I didn't click like. I didn't leave a comment. I didn't say anything at all. I just stared at the photo for a moment, then closed the app and went back to work. Because here's the thing they never tell you when you're the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't make waves, you get very good at living without applause. You get very good at clapping for yourself in rooms where no one else does. You learn how to keep building even when no one shows up for the ribbon cutting. And eventually, you understand that not everyone who sits at your table deserves a seat, and not everyone who shares your blood deserves your loyalty. That night, after I filed my final report for the quarter and turned off my laptop, I poured myself a glass of wine, not to celebrate or to mourn, but simply to mark the end of something. Not the end of family, or connection, or hope, necessarily. Just the end of pretending. I stood at the window and watched the city breathe beneath me, lights flickering, lives moving forward, and I whispered, not to anyone in particular, but more like a declaration to the silence, to those who never clapped for me, "You don't get to start now." And in the space that followed, I felt something unshakable settle inside me, not anger, not sadness, not even pride, but clarity. The kind that comes when you stop waiting to be seen and finally realize you were never invisible. They just weren't looking.